good afternoon everybody, and it's a bit brutal putting the regulators on in the post-lunch session. I'm going to try and make sure that you all stay awake. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here to give you the Victorian Bus Safety Regulator perspective. If you've read my bio in the conference information, you'll see I'm a fairly new kid on the block. I've worked in safety regulation for about 15 years, but I've only been focused on bus for about the last 18 months as Acting Director of Bus Safety and actually now Director. So I've had a lot to learn about your industry, and I'm still learning. But I'm reassured that one of your very long-standing operators just a little while ago said he's still learning too, so that makes me feel a little bit better. But one thing I learned very, very quickly was that all of you are no less concerned about and committed to safety as those of us who work in the safety regulator in Victoria. Whether you're focused on infrastructure, procurement, contracting, emerging technology, excellence in manufacturing or maintenance or service delivery, the objective of getting people safely from A to B underpins everything you do and is the reason for the enviable safety record of Australia's bus industry. I've learned a couple of other things too, and I'll be honest, I'm mostly a train traveller. Yesterday, Senator Janet Rice said public transport weaves together the social fabric of our society, and she also went on to say that bus services are still considered to be the poor cousins of the transport industry. And I accept that that's true, but it's hard to understand it, isn't it? I live in a part of Melbourne that is amongst the fastest growing municipalities in Australia, and it's bus that is servicing the public transport needs of that community. Arguably, the growth that we see on the fringes of our urban areas couldn't happen if it weren't for the role that bus is playing, and in that we see its strong contribution to those communities. I thought I'd start by giving you a bit of a picture of what the bus industry means for Victoria from my perspective as the safety regulator. Melbourne is Australia's fastest growing city. As of March this year, 6 of the top 10 fastest growing municipalities are in Victoria. I guess they're coming there for our great coffee and wonderful weather and for the footy. The latest Bureau of Statistics population figures show that Victoria has grown by just over 1 million people in the past 8 years, and I think it's fair to say that population growth is kind of happening at a faster rate than might have been expected in the past. 15 years ago, we were 3.5 million. Today, we're 6.5 million. And by 2025, there'll be at least another million people. And that's just around the corner. Naturally, this rapid growth of the state is driving a significant investment in infrastructure development right now, known as Victoria's Big Build. The state's basically a construction zone, as has been the case in Sydney recently and other areas as well, so it's not unique to us. To cope with existing growth and prepare for the future, the government has got a multi-billion-dollar program of works going on rail infrastructure, tunnel works, road upgrades, level crossing removals and so on. And all of that's intended to keep our people moving to jobs, to schools, to friends and families. And with ambitious building projects comes significant upheaval. With these planned and unplanned disruptions, it's the bus industry in Victoria that's playing an essential part to keep people moving, and I'm sure that you understand this far better than me. And this has been demonstrated very well this year with extensive rail replacement services being provided by bus, with hundreds of replacement service buses moving around the network, and that's in addition to the buses that are already there. And I'm told that that's just the start, that there's going to be so much more of it in the years to come. Buses carried 22% of all public transport trips in Victoria. So the government's buying new buses, it's adding new routes, it's looking at new technologies, innovative ideas such as driver training, real-time route navigation apps, alternate fuels, electric buses, education and so much more. And it's bus operators in Victoria and obviously in other states as well that are driving these improvements in innovation and service delivery, and happily doing so in harmony with improved safety. A great many people are involved in the bus industry from a great many perspectives, and activities like this conference demonstrate that very well, particularly to someone like me, as I said, the new kid on the block. But the one thing we all have in common is that no one wants to see safety suffer, and the ultimate goal for all of us is getting people safely from A to B. As the bus safety regulator for Victoria, I rest easy at night knowing that the vast majority of the industry are responsible, they're committed to safety, and they cooperate proactively and with great integrity in the safe operation of their bus businesses. But like all industries, you have your bad apples. And as the safety regulator, we're determined and committed to bring those to light and to hold them accountable for their deficiencies, and I'll touch on that shortly. As outlined by Shane, there is more to bus safety than road safety. The experience of the bus industry in Victoria makes it well placed to help inform a national approach. So I'm going to talk to you in a little bit of detail about how we as a safety regulator have come to the point where we are at now with our program of work, how the goalposts have shifted during that journey, and how we're responding to what we've learned. But first I'm going to say a few words in initial response to those 9 starting points for a national approach raised by Shane. Safety regulation has to be beyond politics, and indeed Deputy Prime Minister McCormack made that very point when he spoke to us this morning. State and federal ministers have an obvious interest in the creation of a national framework, and I have no doubt that those discussions will show a strong commitment to safety at the same time that it promotes the range of benefits that can flow from national regulatory systems. But it's imperative that the state's safety regulators and other agencies that have oversight of bus operations work together in the interest of driving improvements to safety for our bus passengers and other road users, and that work is informed by their own experience of safety issues as they have played out across the country. This experience will provide essential input to the development of a national framework that we can all live with the consequence that it be uniformly adopted. No one wants a national framework that weakens safety standards, that demonstrably manage risks as they present in ways that may be particularly contextual to a particular jurisdiction. So a national approach has to be as relevant for the buses that drive across the Nullarbor or into the Kimberley, just as well as it is for the buses that drive up to the Snow Country, to the Great Ocean Road, to the Blue Mountains in New South Wales or around our cities. What use is a national approach that results in piecemeal adoption across jurisdictions because we couldn't work through points of difference and agree on a way forward that we can all live with? No one wants to see that. In collaborating on the development of a national approach to bus safety, our objective must be appropriate safety outcomes, but ones that support the continued development, strength and viability of the bus industry. So not gold-plating safety, but ensuring requirements that are commensurate with risk and consequence, and a system that can accommodate the reality of safety experience across the states. The arms of a national framework for bus safety would need to have the capacity to reach far into the nooks and crannies of each jurisdiction's bus industry to ensure that consistent safety systems are adhered to across the board. It would need to be backed up by a robust compliance strategy and significant investment and commitment to in-field compliance activities to identify non-compliance and ensure appropriate consequences for those deficiencies. Our experience in Victoria as the safety regulator is the good operators welcome us in. They're honest, they're open, they're proud of what they're doing, and we find those discussions to be very productive. The bad operators, they try and hide, obviously, so we have to go looking for them. An effective national approach will be one that doesn't dilute the ability of jurisdictions to regulate the whole of the bus industry as it plays out across the country. In saying that, I'm thinking particularly about certain of our operators in Victoria who are certainly giving us plenty of work to do at the moment, and I don't see this changing in a hurry. The Victorian model of an independent bus safety regulator works well because it has the reach to cover the entire spectrum of operators. But there are certainly improvements that could be made, and a national approach would strongly support such improvements. I also feel that there are external factors that require a very holistic approach to solving industries that affect the whole industry. An example of that is violence on buses, including serious assaults on bus drivers. Safety measures including screens, CCTV cameras, driver education can be put in place. And indeed our operators in Victoria, and no doubt this is the experience in other jurisdictions as well, have responded strongly to the need to protect drivers and passengers through such actions. But the societal problems that manifest in increased assaults, for instance, require communication and cooperation across many sectors, for example, mental health, education, law enforcement, etc. The bus industry can't stand alone in trying to address increasing violence when it's not directly responsible for the contributing factors. A national approach to this very complex issue has real potential to help here, I feel, and this is just one example. So, like Reid before me, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our history as well, and a little bit about our journey, to use an overused word, and tell you about the things that are on my radar. So in March 2009, the Victorian Parliament passed the Bus Safety Act 2009, and that new act brought together a range of existing regulatory provisions in relation to bus safety for the first time. Although buses were considered at that time, and obviously still are, the safest mode of road transport in Victoria, as indeed across the country, the regulation of the industry at that time was fragmented, it was narrow in scope, and it was sometimes outdated. The regulatory setting hadn't kept pace with the evolution of the industry. The new legislation, the legislation that's in place now, incorporated features of best practice safety legislation at the time, including performance-oriented safety duties, a chain of responsibility approach to safety, and the adoption of appropriate sanctions for failure to meet regulatory responsibilities. The objective of the legislation at that time was to promote an improved safety culture across all types of bus operations, without impacting unduly on small commercial operations and not-for-profit services run by local government, schools, health and disability services or other community organisations. The Bus Safety Act 2009 came into full operation on 31 December 2010. The vision of the government at the time was that implementation of the Act would strengthen regulation to better deal with the expansion of bus services and unprecedented growth in bus patronage. All operators who met the required definition under the BSA were required to become either registered or accredited. With the objective of making life as easy as possible for operators, a 5-year transition period was in place. And that was important because we were talking about operators that were effectively running very good businesses. So what was so different about the new legislation? Well, this is before my time, but I'm told that the previous legislation was far more prescriptive. I'm told that back in those days, good operators felt they were being dictated to by people that didn't understand what they did about safely managing a bus business. The new Bus Safety Act better empowered operators to manage their risk in the way that they saw as being appropriate for their operation. It provided the space for them to develop and use their own systems, in consultation with us at the time of application for accreditation about aspects of those systems. They were able to move away from a prescriptive one-size-fits-all bureaucratic template that had limited knowledge of who they were and what they did. Since 2010, we've had a significant focus on audits as a mechanism of understanding how effectively the legislation was being adopted. Initially, these focused almost exclusively on two elements, one being the maintenance management system and the other being the management information system. This was to ensure that these fundamental aspects of safety management aligned with what we understood to be in place. When I talked to my team about that time, what I learnt was that a significant number of operators needed assistance to understanding the concept of managing risk SFARP, SFARP being so far as is reasonably practicable and a fundamental underpinning principle in Victoria's transport regulatory system. We believed that this intensive audit activities paid off, with the industry now largely having a sound handle on this concept and how it applies in their business. There are, of course, exceptions, with some operators less inclined to meet this responsibility. So after a number of years of gradual implementation, it became time to ramp up our compliance activities in the field to test how well implementation was rolling out. So July 2011 saw the early stages of our in-field compliance activities to test how well operators were complying with the legislation out there on the road. We started working with Victoria Police, mainly looking to see that buses were appropriately permissioned and that they had the right category of permission for the bus service being operated. Also around this time, our staff were starting to receive intel from the industry. This included information such that that drivers were exceeding their permitted working hours, that they didn't hold driver accreditation, and that buses appeared to be unroadworthy. And this was important for us because it allowed us to hone our audit program to target the operators that we needed to be targeting. In 2016, we established a separate compliance team solely focused on that work, and I have plans to grow that compliance team a little bit more in the coming year. By that stage, we felt that the dust had well and truly settled on the newness of the BSA, and everyone had had sufficient opportunity to get up to speed on it and to be fully implementing it. From our audits, we recognised that many in the industry had sophisticated and well-informed safety-focused operations. But we could also see that there were several areas representing high risk to an otherwise highly compliant industry. For example, within the tour and charter segment, we could see a consistent pattern of non-compliance, with particular concerns about the adequacy of the understanding of key staff in those operations about the safety considerations of their businesses. These people are held responsible under our legislation to manage those risks to safety, but in some cases lack the competence or capacity to do so. That's not to suggest that this whole segment is a problem. Some of our best operators fit within the tour and charter sector. They are multi-generational operators with a proud and sound safety record. But it is the case that, for a range of reasons, this sector give my auditors and compliance officers plenty of work to do. We also see systems as shelfware. They look great on paper, but they're not real and living systems. And it doesn't take too many questions to really tease that out. As a consequence, we were and still are detecting inadequate and unsafe buses because they're not being maintained in accordance with the requirements of bus safety law, which they would be if these systems were real things. We also sometimes see poorly managed and trained drivers who are often part of a casualised workforce. So sometimes we see no ongoing commitment from employers, so little investment in training, and drivers who are under pressure to go for long distances without adequate rest breaks. We see no safety-centric investment in the business. That is, safety isn't seen as a valuable driver for the strength of the business, but as something that costs money and has to be worked around wherever possible. Smart operators understand that the actions that underpin the safety of their bus operations can be a positive driver of business profitability. I've heard this a number of times, including in our last session. So the smart operators, people like you get it. So these issues cause an uneven playing field. The good operators, and they are the majority of our operators, thankfully, are very good. But the bad ones, well, they're pretty bad. It's unfair to those who are complying and investing in their safety systems. And it's unacceptable for a regulator, your regulator, if you're in Victoria, to not hold all operators to the one standard, because the bottom line is that safety for passengers, drivers and other road users is compromised. So our challenge was and continues to be that we ensure we are doing the right work to bring these issues to the surface and tackle them in the way that our legislation allows us to do. That means having a much greater presence in the field. Our in-field compliance team and activities will continue to grow. Most government agencies will tell you that they'd like more budget, more personnel, and we are no exception. But the reality is we have to make the very best use of what we've got and get on with the job. No one's going to be offering me a chunk of more money or a chunk of extra positions. I've got to make the best with what I've got. So to do that, we've developed and refined a risk-based approach backed up by data and intel to guide our audit and in-field compliance activities. And we've been able to do that because of the legacy of that early work post the introduction of the legislation. That extensive audit work and engagement with operators has given us the sound basis for what we are doing now. In developing our audit priorities, we target operators with a number of considerations in mind. They can include things like their exposure to risk through the number of passengers they carry each year, or the type of operator they are, how experienced they are in the industry, the types of incidents they may be involved in, or other factors that indicate that they need more of our attention. We know that the travelling public would expect that we have regular contact with our route bus operators, and we do. This group are responsible, after all, for the majority of bus trips in Victoria, and we have frequent contact with them through our audit team. Those interactions are positive and productive. But we also need to have a handle on the smaller end, for example, the courtesy bus that's operated by the aged care home or the RSL club, and everything in between. So our audit activity looks a little bit different across the range of operators, as you'd expect. When I came to this role a year ago, I came to learn quite quickly that the majority of our operators have sound and effective safety systems that are actively managed. Many of them have been doing this for a long time, down through generations, and they really have their house in order. There's nothing we can lecture them about safety. Operators like this will see less of us because our approach is risk-based. We need to get to those operators who can't or won't comply. They're the minority of operators, but occupy the majority of our time, and that's how it should be. I and my team are committed to holding those operators accountable to their responsibilities under the legislation that we administer. And in doing that work, we're greatly appreciative of the assistance of colleagues across government. While our Act and regulations provide us with an effective framework for regulation of the bus industry, it's not perfect. We don't cover everything. So as such, it's important that we create opportunities to work closely with other parts of government, such as Victoria Police Heavy Vehicles Unit, VicRoads and Commercial Passenger Vehicles Victoria. These compliance partners help us to ensure that our compliance activities have the best spread possible to underscore the mandate of the Bus Safety Act and our role to ensure public confidence in the safety of the bus system. Our in-field compliance activities target high-risk tourist locations where we know we will encounter plenty of the types of operator we have concerns about. Our calendar of events is evolving as we get to locations we've not visited before, to gauge the extent to which our problem operators are turning up at such locations. And it's really pleasing to hear such positive feedback from so many of the drivers that my team talk to at those locations who see our in-field presence as a good thing for your industry. Where we can partner with other agencies, as I've described above, that's a terrific outcome for us. But even when that's not possible and an activity is solely staffed by my personnel, these are valuable activities for us. We treat them as a high priority and we're resourcing them accordingly. It seems to me that the traditional models that the industry is used to seeing are changing, and I've heard that reflected at this conference. We need to be sure that our legislation can respond to that evolution to the extent that it needs to, so that safety is not compromised. We also need to ensure that we're looking for opportunities to streamline regulation by working in collaboration with the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator as much as is possible. Another important element of the work that we do as the safety regulator in Victoria is through our productive relationships with other parts of the Victorian government. The work that we do with colleagues in areas such as the bus contracting and management parts of the Department of Transport, and also areas such as VicRoads and V-Line, provide the collaborative approach to government's interactions with bus operations in Victoria that the public expects. In his opening comments, Shane took us through the list of areas that a comprehensive and robust national approach would cover, and it's impossible to argue against the merits of that list. A vision of the future of the bus industry in Australia that encompasses these areas is an ambitious and exciting vision indeed. As the bus safety regulator in Victoria, I'd be excited to see progress made against such an agenda, and we'd be very keen to be part of that work. It reflects a comprehensive approach to the myriad of issues that can impact on the safety of bus operations, and with the inclusion of the creation of a national bus safety data set, demonstrates that it would allow for evidence and data to inform its future evolution. That's an exciting vision into the possible future for the bus industry and its safety standards in Australia. So in summary, we've seen the creation of national regulatory schemes in other transport sectors, as well as across a range of activities more generally, and these play a strong role in promoting consistency of regulation across jurisdictions while supporting economic opportunity. The role of the states and territories will continue to be important because of the contextual differences we all live with and the impact of those differences in our settings. However, a national approach to key areas that impact bus safety makes great sense and provides an opportunity to reduce regulatory burden by working in collaboration to promote improved safety standards and enhanced accountability for the safety performance of operators. The bus safety team of Transport Safety Victoria is committed to playing our part to ensure that bus passengers and the Victorian community can continue to have faith in this sector and its ability to safely and efficiently get us from A to B, whatever our reason for travelling. Thank you very much.